Today, I continue making my forest game board by making this set of modular trees. You've got the ability to change the height, move the logs around, and add platforms in between. The only limit to this system is your creativity. I used pieces of scrap MDF as the base and glued on toilet rolls as the core structure of the tree. Really, it's done now, and what comes next is texturing. While you could totally use that in a game, I want to spruce it up a bit. So I'm adding aluminium foil to mimic the bark texture. You could use toilet tissue covered in PVA and add layers and layers, but I found that wet and soggy mixture really ruined the integrity of the toilet roll and made it really hard to work with. But here, by laminating the pieces of aluminium together with the PVA glue, we have a really strong core structure. Then using scrap pieces of aluminium foil, I come through and add a couple of roots down the bottom. 2 or 3 per log just to add some more visual interest. And then carve out the bottom of the MDF so it sits more flush with the table. It's super important to use a really sharp blade here and keep it away from your fingers. It's very dangerous. Then I cover it in PVA glue and dunk it in my sand mixture. Fine grain, medium grain, coarse grain, a couple of rocks, and some pieces of green stuff that are left over. Now this is really important. You need to Mod Podge over the aluminium foil, otherwise it won't take paint well at all. You can use spray primer over it as well. I found that worked pretty well. You just need something that the paint can adhere to, because it's going to have a hard time sticking to the aluminium foil. Now because I had 2 toilet rolls in that one structure, I never actually stuck them together. They were just being held there by the aluminium foil. So I can just come through and snip that off. Then I use another toilet roll to mark out a foam piece that will plug up the ends of the log and the stump. Now it's onto that piece that we will stick our metal sheets and our magnets. If you don't have metal sheets and magnets, you can just as easily use toothpicks or skewers and just have a skewer running from the bottom all the way up to the top. So here's my magnets. I end up coming through and adding much bigger magnets because these were not nearly strong enough. These were magnets that I usually use on minis, which wouldn't do. And I tend to put the magnet on the top and the sheet on the bottom, just to mimic everything else I've made. Now that everything's covered in a black Mod Podge base coat, it's time to get started on painting. I come in with a burnt umber and completely cover the logs. Then when the burnt umber is dry, I come in with a mixture of burnt umber, yellow ochre and white, which is much brighter tan sort of color. And that really brings out all of the detail in the aluminium foil. Just by crunching it up and adding many layers, you get a really nice bark looking texture. For the ground, I come in with a mix of really watered down bright green, dark green and brown, and kind of just mix and wet blend them together into this mucky dirt paint mixture. And when that's dry, I completely cover it in a bunch of clump foliage. When the glue is dry, I come through with a pair of tweezers just to take off any top lying clump foliage. That way I can reuse it for later and get even more legs out of this foliage. And that's the tree entirely done. Next, we're moving on to the platforms. The platforms are built on a base of these old DVDs. I cut a little ring of toilet paper to give me an idea of how big I need that metallic piece to be within it, and kind of mimic some of that trunk still coming through the tree, and just fill that up with hot glue to make a solid foundation. And then in the bottom, I'll stick a magnet, and on the top, I'll stick one of those metal pieces so I maintain that modularity. If you were using the toothpick method, you just skewer a hole right through the center. Thanks to the base being made out of hot glue, by just adding more hot glue it reactivates and heats up the whole rest of the hot glue. But the piece of metal is also really hot, so be very careful. I use super glue to just lock in the magnet because it's very strong and was coming out quite a lot. And just carve off the excess that may have dried on the top. Always checking and double checking, making sure that I've got a nice clean bond and connection between it, and making sure that miniatures will be able to stand up there. I texture the main log the same way I did with the rest of them, bit of aluminium foil, and then for the planks I'm just using coffee stir sticks, and I'll come through and texture them with a piece of wire razor at the end. I was using PVA glue originally to do this, but it was taking quite a while. I wasn't quite sure if the bond was going to be strong enough, so I just ended up using super glue. I went through like 3 or 4 little tubes of super glue, and it started smelling terrible in my room. I had to open the window and put on the exhaust fan. I debated putting railings around the platforms and on the rest of the little walkways, but in the end I decided against it because it will inhibit gameplay a bit too much. As you can see, this is a really long and tedious process, but the look at the end is what makes it all worth it. If you wanted, you could just have a DVD, paint it brown, and that's your platform. And here's the razor just coming through and scratching up all the surface and making it have a nice exaggerated wood texture. Now we'll need some way to get between these platforms. I made several 5 inches and a few 9-inch ones, and that gives a really nice variety of sizes. So I marked the maximum lengths and 1 inch from either end of that. I sticky tape them down and make them about 2 centimeters apart from each other, making sure that they're both running parallel. And then even more coffee stir sticks. I cut these at 2 inches and started gluing from the first inch mark to the next inch mark. And then once they were dry, took off the tape and stuck on the rest of the sides. You could use PVA glue here, but it's very runny and it'll get everywhere. So tacky glue is my preferred method. I sprayed these in a black primer, making sure to get the bottom of the DVD, that reflective surface. And then came through and painted it the same way I did with the trees. And then on the platforms, I mixed together a yellow ochre and white paint, and that really mimics a deck tan pretty well. And then came through just on all of the platforms, covered it in that, and a little bit brighter in the center of those platforms where it'll get the most traffic. And that's it all done. 6 trees, 6 platforms, and 5 walkways will completely fill up a skirmish-sized game board. You could double that, add a few more trees, add a few more platforms, make bigger platforms, longer walkways, walkways connecting to the ground, and you could go crazy with this modular system. The possibilities are endless. It is only bound by your creativity. Thanks for watching to the end. If you want more, like and subscribe, because I try to get a video out every week.